Thank you very much, Nakdimon, and thank you for both speakers, Yahya and Nakdimon, for your statements in round 2. That concludes round 2 of the rebuttals. We will now move on to round 3, which will be the concluding statements. Each participant will again have 10 minutes. We will begin with Yahya19 with his concluding statement, and we will proceed to Nakdimon, and that will wrap it up, and then we will go into our crossfire round. Sounds very exciting, and so let's go ahead and begin the concluding statement with Yahya. Mic is free.
Okay, thank you. My opponent here doesn't seem to know how things lead up to Genesis 22. Why did Abraham say, or why did God tell Abraham, your only son? Well, because Ishmael was already casted out. Ishmael was miles and miles away. It wasn't as if Abraham said, eeny, meeny, miny, Isaac. There was no Ishmael there. The only son that was living with Abraham was Isaac. This is why it says your only son, because it's the only one that's living with him. Does that exclude Ishmael from the promise? Absolutely not, because the promise is reaffirmed over and over again of a great nation. Now, my opponent mentioned the Rashi commentary. If I could have him paste that again. In the Rashi commentary, nowhere does it mention covenant. The word covenant is not mentioned in the Rashi commentary. Furthermore, it backs up what I was saying. Yes, the inheritance went to Isaac. I agree. Inheritance is not the covenant, nor the promise. So, I don't know why, thank you, by the way, for posting that Rashi commentary, because it backs up what I was saying. Furthermore, my opponent said, show me where the covenant is a nation. He asked me to show him where the covenant is a nation. In fact, it's even given to Isaac, the same promise of a nation. He read it himself. Let me see if I could find that verse. That is Genesis 17:3 and Abraham, and 17:4. And Abraham fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, as for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of many nations. Nations is the covenant. Later on, he asked me, show me where the fruitful seed gets a covenant. Okay, in Genesis 17:2. And I will establish my covenant between me and you, and will multiply you exceedingly. This terminology, multiply you exceedingly, is for the fruitful offspring, which is mimicked in Genesis 17:20. Once again, the exact same word, multiply you exceedingly, is referred to Ishmael, because he is the fruitful offspring. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you, behold, I have blessed him, and I will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. This is the covenant. And Ishmael signed the covenant, as my opponent somehow is not acknowledging. I'm asking my opponent, do you acknowledge that Ishmael physically signed the covenant? Please tell us yes or no when you get on the mic. Secondly, more evidence that the covenant, the promise, is a nation. I'll repeat, Genesis 18:18, where the promise is a nation. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on the earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. What is the promise? The great and powerful nation. And this great and powerful nation is mimicked over and over regarding Ishmael. So I have answered all of the questions that my opponent had. Number one, why is he called the only son? Because Ishmael is miles and miles away. The only son is Isaac with Abraham at this time, according to the Bible. Secondly, is Ishmael part of the promise of a nation? Absolutely. This is mimicked over and over after he's casted out in Genesis 25:18. His descendants scattered in the area from Havana to Shur, near the border of Egypt. Remember how my opponent said that the fruitful seed will be persecuted in Egypt. Yes, Ishmael was. The Ishmaelites are part of the mixed multitude that left with Moses. It was Ishmaelites. Furthermore, I'm gonna paste a verse that my opponent did not post, and that is Genesis 22. Let me see if I could find it. 22:17. I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. All nations on the earth. This is once again referring to the promise equal nation. It is the nation that will change the world. It is the nation that will bring all mankind to the God of Abraham. Once again, I want to tell my opponent, inheritance is not the issue here. Inheritance did go to Isaac, but the promise stayed with both seed. And there is no verse at all that my opponent has shown us which excludes Ishmael from the promise. If there was a verse, then the rabbinical argument, the Torah scholars, would have never said that the promise of Ishmael was fulfilled, if there was no promise. Indeed, the promise of Ishmael was fulfilled because there was a promise. There was a promise. And the Rashi commentary agrees with what I was saying. Inheritance went to Isaac. The promise went to both. Shall I read it again? The Holy Chumash, page 76. We see from the prophecy in this verse that 2,337 years elapsed before the Arabs, Ishmael's descendants, became a great nation with the rise of Islam in the 7th century CE. Throughout this period, Ishmael hoped anxiously until finally the promise was fulfilled and they dominated the world. Oh, and by the way, the word for nation is not a bad word. It means a nation of Gentiles in Hebrew. It means a nation of Gentiles. I don't know how my opponent would ever say that's a bad word, somehow bashing Ishmael by saying that God said he's going to have a great nation. Therefore, a great nation means an insult. That's absurd. That's absurd. Indeed, the promise is a nation, and every rabbinical argument, every Torah scholar you go to will laugh at you if you say that the promise is not a nation, because the entire state of Israel is based upon the promise of Isaac. The nation of Israel is based upon the promise of Isaac. So yes, indeed, the promise of Abraham is a nation. And with that, I pass the mic.